But your manifesto clearly talks about the distance from the home to the school, and give an average of about 4 to 5 kilometers from home to the school. Wouldn't it then be better to focus and figure out how do I get the schools closer to where these kids are so they don't have to walk that long distance? Number one. Number two,
how do you do that?
You're going to be the governor. Maybe figure out what do we get land where we can be able to build schools closer to those areas.
But that's why it's not in my manifesto, because that's your idea.
I'm just asking what is the concern for most people, because if a child has to walk 5 kilometers, as an adult walking 5 kilometers is about 1 hour's walk. Okay, as a child, it probably will be much longer. So that child then will be taking a long period of time to walk to school and back, meaning the child is using 2 hours on commute.
You don't solve that by building schools closer to the children. You solve that by creating affordable, reliable, proper mass transit, which we talk about in the manifesto. So that is addressed when you talk about transit system, when you talk about our public transport. You can't have a city where the only thing public about the transport is the passengers. In fact, I've just done a meeting right now with all the matatu circles in Nairobi, and we're talking about decongestion and how they can be able to serve the people better without necessarily losing their business.
Yes.
And one concern, for instance, they had was about impounding, impounding of vehicles, and I really quickly looked at the revenue that a vehicle is impounded because of a traffic infraction. It is kept over for a weekend, and through that weekend they have lost income, yet you should fine the driver. And so I looked at the revenue from impounding. For a whole year, it's 4 million shillings.
Which is very little.
Which means a lot is leaked. It goes to people's pockets.
Now that we got into the transport, and let's then just get into that transport conversation very well. As a private citizen, one of the things that I want to be able to do is to move from point A to point B without any disturbance, spend as little time as possible on traffic, make sure that when I get there, there's not much dust or water or interruption in my commute.
Yes.
How then do you balance between obeying the law and then making sure that people continue doing business? Because I'm assuming that the reason why that material is being impounded is because it's broken the law. Either it's picking passengers from the wrong place, dropping passengers on the wrong place, using the wrong side of the law. So on one side, we are saying that let's not impound and keep them. But on the other side, as citizens who are using that transport, we also want them to be able to obey the law. Where then is the trade-off?
We're not saying just let them go off. Fine them. When you have an infraction in your private vehicle, your vehicle is not impounded. You're fined by the police officer. And ideally, we've said we're going to reduce human interaction with cash. It's a sport fine. And you're charged. And the driver is taken. It's not the vehicle that drove itself badly. It's a driver
who drove
it badly. So you actually punish the driver, not the vehicle.
Is it possible to resolve the transport or the traffic issue in Nairobi County?
Definitely. It's definitely possible to
How do you see that happening?
Number one, as I've said, you need the public mass transit system, number one, with high rail, with heavy rail, light rail. And there's a plan that's been done, cost 400 million shillings, done by JICA. Nairobi contributed 100 million. Our Japanese partners did 300 million shillings. It talks about a loop line. It talks about a comprehensive system with a viaduct, etc., that must be implemented. Nairobi is a global hub, 21st century, that has no public mass transit system. That must be done. Addis Ababa has done that at the cost of around 45 billion. We've spent money on an expressway that very few people are using, yet that ideally would have been space for a transit system, because the more roads you build, the more people buy cars. Thika Road was supposed to alleviate traffic, the superhighway, but everybody moved there. You don't want to be there between 7 and 8 a.m. So the only way the biggest way to resolve it is by mass transit, where you're transporting larger amounts of people within a given space, as opposed to one individual just driving his car.
Yes, I agree with you on that. The cost of doing the JKIA to Nairobi rail system is going to cost about almost between 16 and 20 billion shillings based on how the dollar behaves. How much do you think it will cost Nairobi to be able to do this, Nairobi as a county?
Well, you can do a proper mass transit system with around 100 billion shillings. I'll give you the example of Ethiopia using around 45B. There's some differences in terms of what they want. So you talk about 100 billion shillings, and that's in different phases. You don't do all phases. You do one line. You can do the north line, and then later you do the south line.
Is that possible to do within 5 years, assuming that you are able to get the JICA report activated? And
if the resources are available, you can do it. Dubai did theirs in 3 years. with the resources being available.
But you see the difference in some of these countries, and I think that's a question that we all have to be able to face, is that the land tenancy system is a bit different. If you're doing it in a place like Nairobi, for example, that piece of land where you're trying to build that, where the road is passing, where the rail system is passing, belongs to somebody else. That person wants to be compensated. It increases the cost of the project. Then you start having fights between yourself and that person. Will that be a feasible project to be able to do?
Yeah, if you look at the JICA plan, all of those rail whatnot on public land. They're on the roads that we actually have. So it's Kenha land, it is Kura land. A lot of it is elevated. If you look at the example of the Dubai Metro, if you look at the Riyadh Metro. In fact, one of the people who was actively involved with that is called George Odongo, who's a Kenyan. So we understand that the tenure system and there are laws around that compulsory acquisition, but most of it, possibly 90%, is on actual, you're doing it in the middle of Jogo Road. You're doing it on Thika Road. You're doing it on, because there's a line, north to south, east to west. And so most of it is public land. Number two, there's also the reserves of the roads we have. Yeah, those road reserves are actually part of public land. You're not going to do heavy rail cutting through Riverside or through Kilimani. It is actually, there's a radial and there's the ones on the major lines. So that would be catered for. When
you speak of reserve, we then start speaking about order within the city, because I think a lot of people have also built onto those reserves, which then brings us to the next question, whether things, for example, people built on the reserves, hawkers being in the city, street children being, street families being in the city, traders wanting to trade goods or whatever it is that they're selling in spaces that they're not allowed to be able to do that. How then as a governor, if you're elected, how then will you make sure that all these things are done and people don't feel or start saying that you're disrupting their lives and livelihoods?
You see, once people understand that the provision of order is for everybody's good, that when there is order, you'll actually be able to run your business better. When there is order, you'll be able to, get from point A to point B quicker. And all these aspects, you're talking about congestion. And I was just explaining to the Matatu circles. In as much as there's what we would do to concede, they also need to concede and be on the right place. But you must do it with the people. You plan with the people. If you look at the Green Park bus terminal that the government was trying to do, it has failed. It will completely fail because it was planned without involving the stakeholders, and it cannot work. Even just the turning radius, even once you drop people across the CBD, how they get into town, all of that will completely fail because you have not involved the people from the beginning. And in fact, we thought maybe that then can be used for something else. You have participatory leadership. You can't just come and impose rules on people, but carry them along. And I'll give you another example. If you go to Dagoretti South constituency in Ngando, there's a huge market that was built. The government insisted on building it top down, deciding on how it's to be structured. Traders have refused to move in because you're putting on the fourth floor somebody selling tomatoes and onions. Who is going to walk up four floors? Allow me to finish. Who's going to walk up 4 floors, 4 stories, just to buy 3 tomatoes and 2 onions? I
hear the point you're making, that traders don't want to, which is the question that I was asking earlier, that human beings will always want to refuse to go to places that they don't think is convenient for them. But sometimes for you to be able to force order and force law, you must be able to force people to do things that are a bit uncomfortable. So just like even with the public rail system that you're talking about, if then we put people and drop people in places where they feel like, okay, I still have to walk a certain distance and so on and so forth. It is what has to be done. How then do we balance that? That's
what the point I'm making. The point I'm making is that you must carry the people along with the development. You don't plan top down. You plan bottom up. You plan with the people. And I mean, the residents of the city are not children that you just come and impose things on them. They can understand, they can see the sense of what development means to them. So unless you're talking about a dictatorship, where you just say, this is what I'm going to do, and you do it. We're not a dictatorship. We're in a democracy. Article 10 talks about public participation, carrying the people along. You must do that. There's no other way. And especially not in Nairobi.